you
Yes,
talk about completing cycles?
yes. It's something I talk about quite a bit. If for no other reason, it is so important in our learning how to change, learning how to move on in our lives, learning how to let go of things, so that whole new resources of energy can enter our system and transform us and change us inside. I mean, cycles are integral to nature. I mean, uh, time is an element of cycles. There's seconds, there's minutes, there's hours, and nature, there's summer, spring, winter, fall. Everything is moving in terms of cycles. And human beings also, exist in that whole realm of cycles. I mean, we're born, we live, we die. It's a whole cycle of energy. And within, that birth to death, time and space, we undergo many, many different cycles. As we age, and jobs and relationships and all kinds of things evolve around cycles. And these cycles are very important. And part of the inner growth in a person is the recognition when cycles begin and also when cycles end. I mean, usually there's a lot of joy and love when cycles begin. And there's a lot of, difficulty when cycles end. People have to let go. I remember somebody, got married, and, they were married for 5 years or so, and the marriage became really difficult, abusive, et cetera, et cetera. And the person called me up and I said, look, God created marriage, God created divorce. The cycle has come to an end. The energy is no longer in that particular creative cycle. It is time to let go of it. And we all have to learn that when the time comes for us to let go. When the time comes for us to regenerate ourselves and enter a new cycle of change and time and everything else that comes with it. And these are absolutely significant elements in spiritual growth, because as you grow spiritually and develop a strong inner life, you become conscious of cycles, and there isn't all that resistance to the end of a cycle. And you recognize when things come to an end and you graciously move on. I mean, if you spent 10 years of your life with somebody and the relationship has come to an end, instead of being angry and upset at the person, when you develop a strong inner life, you look at the person and say, okay, I spent 10 years of my life with you. I learned a great deal. I'm grateful for the time we spent together, and it's now time to move on. I mean, it's a very gracious way of ending a relationship, to just recognize that one has really devoted a good portion of their life to another human being. And if it comes to an end, instead of being angry and upset, and, be grateful for whatever you learned from that person, for whatever happened with that person. Be grateful for whatever you learned from a job, no matter how long you spent at the job. If it comes to an end, instead of being upset, be grateful. What did I learn? It helped me pay my bills for this part of my life. And that kind of gratitude shows tremendous maturity and depth of growth. And it also gets rid of a lot of anger and arguments and rage and people trying to, do each other in, and, et cetera, all that madness that goes on in the world. But that madness doesn't come to an end unless a person reaches a place inside themselves where they can recognize the end of a cycle and they can be grateful for whatever that cycle brought into their life. even if it was really difficult things. It's just an amazing way to work out one's karma. Because instead of ending a cycle with anger, unhappiness, venting, and rage, you end it with love, with gratitude, with thanks, and you really can move on from whatever it was. And I can honestly tell you in my life, this is true anyway. When a door closes, another door always opens. And when you're conscious and developing a strong inner life, you recognize that door opening and leading to a whole new level of creativity, a whole new cycle of growth. And this gives a certain freedom to living, you know? We're not stuck. I remember years ago when I was, in my early 20s, I used to go to acting classes here, in New York. And I had this woman who, she and I used to do scenes together. We became good friends. I got to know her husband, kids. I used to go by their apartment, on Riverside Drive and rehearse scenes with her. And I, after I got out of that and realized that that profession wasn't for me, I'd been working, maybe a couple of years later, I was working in a restaurant, which, talk about cycles. That was the end of a cycle for me of doing that kind of work, that restaurant, you know. But anyway, I'm waiting and I see this couple who I hadn't seen for a couple of years, and they were kind of good friends of mine. And so I go up and I walk up to them and my mouth dropped. It was the same guy, but the woman was different, but she looked exactly like, this woman I used to do scenes with in acting school. And I was just like blown away. I was like, hey, how you doing? And holy shit, it's different. It's a different person. He's with a different woman who looks exactly like what his wife looked like. Which obviously to me, which I wasn't conscious enough to read, the cycle hadn't come to an end. He was trying to relive the old cycle. And we all try to do that. We try to relive what happened in our life, and we find ourselves repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again until we reach that point in ourselves where we can truly let go. And then life has an amazing ability to really change for us and to bring a whole new level of work, living in the world, everything changes. So the question of cycles is very important. I remember that restaurant I worked in. It was on 83rd Street and 3rd Avenue. And I probably worked in 500 restaurants when I was a kid. I mean, I would get a job. I had no money. I would get some money in my pocket. I would either quit or I got fired. I never could stay more than 3 months at one of those jobs. And when I finally got this job in the restaurant, I made a commitment to myself. And the commitment was, I will do this the rest of my life if I have to. And I will finish some kind of cycle that this has brought into my life and learn something. I really made that commitment. I will work. I'm not going to get fired. And I'll sustain the job and I'll really work at it. And I've been studying with Rudy for like 8 months, and he used to talk about these things all the time. And I remember the commitment I made, and I was working and working, and I was there for like 6, 8 months at this restaurant. And I realized it was time for me to quit. And I knew I was finished with that kind of work, waiting tables and bartending and all that. When the owner of the restaurant came up to me and said, Stuart, if you ever need a job, you're always welcome to work here. That never happened to me before. It never happened. And I said, Stuart, you have worked out your karma here. The cycle is over with. And then my whole life changed. I started doing other kinds of business. I started a business. I started all kinds of stuff I had never done before. Then I wound up, like 6 months later in Denton, Texas. You know, I mean, running an ashram, my whole life changed. But I worked out that cycle. It was the same way with school. Rudy said, I want you to get a degree. I said, why? He said, well, you need a degree because I'm going to send you probably to Big Indian to teach, and you need to be able to earn a living. I said, all right. So I went and got a degree. When you get a degree, your whole life is going to change, he told me. And it did. I finished. And when I was in school, I realized I wasn't there to learn anything. I was there because I could have learned everything they were teaching me from books. I could have gotten the books in a library. I could have bought them at Barnes and Noble. And I could have studied and learned what they would. I was there for only one reason. And when I finally realized that reason, I graduated, on the highest level you could have graduated from that school. And the reason was I was there to finish a cycle. I was there to learn how to bring a level of completion to my life. And it was amazing, because I had never even thought about that before. And then I look back at my life. I was 25 years old then, 26 years old. And I said, Stuart, you have never finished anything in your life. You always quit, you run away, you get some money and you're off to Europe, you're off to, somewhere. You're always on your way to India. And I needed to learn to complete something. And the school, it really gave me that incredible sense of what it means to complete a cycle and to be finished with something. And all of this pertains to development of a spiritual life, because the spiritual life manifests in cycles. Cycles that we enter, we learn from, we move on from, we grow past, Does anyone else have a question they would like to ask? Does anyone have a question? I hope this is all clear, because this is very basic, very fundamental stuff. And not only in inner work and inner development, but simply learning how to live in the world and how to not put yourself down and think you're less important because you're doing a job that you don't like, or, every job has some importance on this planet. Every relationship has some importance on this planet. And it all goes haywire when we forget to learn from it and to be grateful for whatever is taking place in our life. And yes, if it's negative, and sheer openness of the heart will give you a way of leaving a situation that is an impossible situation without that situation tearing you to pieces. And nobody is less important because of what they do in this world. Whatever their job is, it is somehow filling a place on the earth, whatever it is, it doesn't matter, from being the head of a country to being, somebody who works, I don't know, as a janitor or whatever they do, it's important. And it's important to learn to do these things with consciousness, with love, well, not be angry and think that you're a diminished human being because you're doing a certain kind of work. It's all nonsense. And it's all stigmas that society puts on us and creates slaves out of people, Does anyone else have a question they would like to ask?
Stuart, can you talk about divided attention outside of the meditation class, just going about the day, how you split your attention between the hara and the engagements?
Well, Wendy, it's what I talk about all the time. When you get the training and the development over time, you organically, bring your attention to the hara, and it doesn't leave when you leave meditation class. It's there whatever you do during the day. You have conditioned yourself to live that way. And then you can divide your attention for many things, because you're balanced inside. But it doesn't leave when you get that kind of really deep training, that conditioning, when the class is over, it doesn't, well, now I'm not in my hara anymore. Now I'm in my mind and you understand? You stay there. It just becomes integral to your life. It's like, it's really similar to the martial arts. The whole training in the martial arts is learning how to get centered, in the hara, in the tatien with his chi. That's the whole training.
Mhm.
And once people develop that, it's with them all the time. They live that way. You can see, I can walk down the street and see somebody who really is a black belt martial artist on the street. I can just see them, the way they walk, where their mind is, where their attention is. A lot of them don't have open hearts, which is a whole other story, So that martial art thing becomes very violent. But you can see the training they have, and they don't leave it in the gym. They bring it with them, whatever they're doing, and they are centered. And this work that I teach is kind of like a martial art, and but it's not just building chi, it's building the heart center, it's building the throat, the sexual energy, the kundalini, it's building the entire chakra system. So that when you develop that kind of inner life, when you leave this class, you don't leave it here. You take it with you wherever you are, at your job, at the grocery store, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, you have that centeredness inside you. I mean, I've met people on the street. How could you be so calm? I don't even know these people. And they look at me, how could you be so calm? With all this stuff going on the, I said, well, what? Years of training. I don't usually say that. I just kind of smile and walk away, walk on. But years of training. So you don't leave it here. You take it with you.
How long did it take you, Stuart, before you were fully present in that way, not going in and out of the mind?
Look, you never do it 100%, Wendy. You never. But as you develop your inner life, you have the ability to, when you start getting into that frazzled brain, you can bring the attention down. Understand? You just have that ability to do that. And there'll always be a piece of your attention that, in the head, and the emotions, and nobody's perfect. But part of the training is to be able to bring that all down and not let it take over. Not let it take over. How long did it take me to learn this? I mean, I was, you don't know me when I was 25 years old, when I met Rudy, what I was like. He once told me, I'll never take another student like you. Told me this, Rudy. So I said, well, I made the cut, thank God, That's what he told me, I mean, I was pretty, but I had one thing going for me that was always going. I wanted a spiritual life. As crazy as I was and as unhappy and depressed as I was, my overriding need was to have a spiritual life. And I would do anything to get it. And I knew the things that he was teaching me would get me there. And I had to learn them. And it took years. It didn't come in a couple of days, a week, a month, a year. It took time. And then it took years of developing it after Rudy passed on. Of taking, monumental situations on my shoulders in order to teach me how to get centered and stay centered. And still today, my head will start, and then I just bring it, and just shut up, and go down, get down here. I don't have time to listen to your nonsense. Does anyone else have a question?
Thanks, Stuart.
You're welcome.
What comes to mind is taking on the teaching role in this, Stuart. What was that a frightening thing for you? Is it still at times? How do we know that we would be ready to do that?
Oh, you'll know when it happened. Look, to be honest with you, before I developed the chakra system that developed over years of doing this inner work, most of life scared the shit out of me. I hid in the world of art and music and the world of writing. I hid out. And I kind of was like a hermit living in New York City, and then after this started to develop, the whole world changed. And I began to recognize that all of this is my teacher. All of this is showing me how to live my life in a much more creative and deeper way, much more loving way. It all changed. But before I got that training, my world was, the world, was like living in some hermitage that I created for myself. And always with this need to have a spiritual life. And I read every book imaginable on how to do it, and none of it got me there until I met Rudy and I learned what he had to teach me. And I began to see how this thing works. So if you have those kind of fears, don't worry about it. Just build your inner life and it'll all change. It all changes. And you don't even know when it changes. It just happens organically. I mean, from living in Rudy's University of Schmuckdom, which for so many years he used to tell me, look at him and how extraordinary he is, and you're such a jerk. And he was doing it intentionally because he knew that he would break down my ego and he would break me down so I can get to a deeper place in myself. Just before he died, he came over and gave me a big hug and he said, Stuart, you're my favorite of all the students. That's what he told me. And it brought a tear to my eye, It's not that I needed to be gratified, but it was just, it really was just a sign of the incredible amount of work that I did on myself when I was younger in order to change. I remember when I was living in Texas, I built a huge situation down there with restaurants and bakeries and real estate all over the town. And I mean, I had a huge situation, you know, and there was this there was this guy from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram newspaper in Fort Worth who called me up, and he wanted to do an article on the ashram. And he came up and he spent the entire day there. And he wrote a beautiful article about this amazing group of people that work together and are creating an extraordinary situation for themselves up in Texas, you know? And then some people complained to him. And like a month later, he wrote, the same guy, he wrote a whole different article of how terrible this ashram was and blah, 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 and people's complaints. And one of my students freaked out. She came up to me, and I had the students, the people that complained, I hadn't seen for a long time. And I said to her, you know, if I was this way 3 years ago, I really must have changed. And she looked at me and smiled. She said, you're the only person who could have read this article and responded that way. I must really have changed a lot if I was this way 3-4 years ago. And that's the truth. You know, we go through our cycles, we go through our changes. You know, we can't be deterred by the craziness of the world. We have to just be totally convinced that, you know, we are doing what really works for us, helping us to grow, helping us to become better human beings, helping us to really evolve in ourselves. And whatever the external world says, it's just bullshit. It doesn't matter. Because they can take any situation and you can look at it in 50 different ways. I mean, for God's sake, you'd be sitting in heaven, and if you don't like what you see, you can tear it apart, you know? You can find 50 things wrong with heaven. So the work of this inner work is really what develops the capacity, you know, to change and to be able to embrace the world and to let everything, including some reporter in Fort Worth who was writing this nasty article about me, really nasty article. And when I read it, I said, you know, if I was this way, I must have really changed a lot. And this woman just cracked up laughing. She said, only you could respond to something like that. I just took it. I give, leave me alone with this nonsense. I remember, and Bob Singh can testify to this, you know, the city council used to do a Miss Denton contest every year. And 2 Miss Dentons won Miss America. So this was a really important contest for them. And they couldn't get anyone to sponsor it. So they called me up. They say, Stuart, we'd like to know if the ashram is willing to sponsor the Miss Denton contest. And Bob Singh can tell you, you know, it's the truth. And I started to laugh. I said, are we the only people you could find in town? And he said, yeah, you know, can you do this? And I said, yeah, we did it. We had a lot of fun. It was really, had all these people involved in craft shows and parades, and we sponsored it, you know? And then Newsweek magazine came down there and they interviewed me for like 3-4 hours, you know, this reporter. And when the article came out in Newsweek, it was maybe 3 inches. You know, and it just you know, made fun of everything we were doing there. Even the Buddhists think big in Texas, you know, that's how they ended the article. And I started to laugh. So I called up the reporter and I said, what the hell did I waste my time with you for? He said, Stuart, I wrote a beautiful article about you and the ashram, and this is what Newsweek did with it. Some editor up there just tore it down to what they published. What was I going to do? Take it seriously? Get angry? Write nasty letters to Newsweek? And then this reporter said, if you want to really read the article, he said to me, it's coming, there used to be an airline called Frontier Airlines. It's coming out in the magazine of Frontier Airlines. And I happened to make a trip on Frontier Airlines. There was the magazine. I read the article. It was a beautiful article that he had written about this meditation group that we had in Denton. So what was I going to do? Get pissed off at Newsweek magazine? It was just nonsense. And it's learning. I learned to keep the media away from me because they're nuts. They come and you never know what the hell they're going to write. I mean, so I used to keep them out in Texas. I used to get calls from television stations wanting to come and do it. I refused. I told them, no, I'm not interested. So I learned very early on about media. And you have to be very careful with media. Instead of being angry at them, they taught me something, And that's what life is there to do, I mean, really, that's when you start opening and embracing life that way, there's never a fear of anything that life can do. You just open to learn from whatever it is that life has to teach you. Does anyone else have a question they would like to ask? Again, I'm not talking from things I've read in books. This is out of my own experience, what I've been through in my life. There's so much that you don't know about the way I've lived my life and the things that have happened to me in my life. And how everything that has happened, just my teacher, it's helped me to grow in my life. And that's why I really believe that life is the temple, not the church, the synagogue, the mosque, the temple. Life itself is the temple. And everything in life in its own strange way is sacred. Therefore, it teaches us something about how to get to God. Does anyone else have a question they would like to ask? Okay, there'll be a class tomorrow evening. And again, as I end these classes all the time, I am so grateful to be here, that you all show up for these classes. I can't tell you, it's just to me a great miracle. And I have that for every single person here, I have just infinite gratitude. And each and every one of you make me work on myself in a depth that I can bring something important to these classes. So thank you and bless you. And I'm looking forward to seeing everybody tomorrow. God bless you.
Night, Stuart. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart.
Fantastic.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Night.